When the weather warms up, so does the real estate market. Sounds obvious, right? It's true. Spring typically means more home sales. But how will the current interest rates affect people's decisions? What about inventory? Is it high or low? And does that benefit the buyer or the seller? And how do those factors take into account a certain price point or area of the triad? Now it's not so obvious, is it? That's why you should turn to the Ginther Group to make sense of it all. You need someone you can rely on to assess your situation, read the data and trends, and point you in the right direction. Interest rates, inventory, even new construction. There are so many factors that impact our local market. And you should get your information from the folks right here in our backyard. Contact Blake Ginther and the Ginther Group today, 336-283-8689, or visit theginthergroup.com. Buying, selling, investing, or just learning, whatever you need, start now. And like me, you can become a Ginther Group client for life.
This is the Triad Podcast Network.
I'm Algenon Cash, and you're locked in. Today on the show, we're joined by John Hood, who's a veteran of the Locked In Show. He's a conservative thinker, historian, author, and president of the John William Pope Foundation. And with Trump back in the White House, we're diving into some of the most consequential policy shifts unfolding in the past 78 days, from America's role on the world stage to domestic priorities like immigration, federal workforce cuts, and the evolving relationship between tech, power, and politics. This conversation will unpack what's at stake and how it all might impact voters and their growing sense of uncertainty about this new administration. And John, I would say, first of all, thank you for locking in. But I think uncertainty is going to be the word of 2025. We every single year, pivot was the word of the COVID era. Right. And I think uncertainty is the word of 2025. John, you speak with a lot of conservatives on air and off air, on stage and behind the scenes. I just want to start with a basic question. What are Republicans, what are politicians, what are conservatives telling you behind the scenes right now?
It's a mixture. Thank you for having me back on. I appreciate it. I have been taking the pulse of people both in North Carolina and around the country who work in conservative world, who work in Republican politics, people who work on the Hill. There's lots of uncertainty is a good word to put. Some of them believe that, for example, the immediate reaction to the tariff announcement the president made is going to prove ephemeral and things will adjust back to something like a new normal. Others are convinced that this is a gyration that's going to take months, if not years, to play out. So there's a lot of uncertainty. But I think when it comes to the exercise of federal power, of presidential power, members on Capitol Hill are increasingly nervous that if there was a secret ballot to vote on a bill to revoke the authority the president was given by Congress decades ago to impose tariffs during emergencies, I think that vote would be almost unanimous, but it's not a secret ballot. And it's important to remember that there are many different aspects to the immigration story, to the trade story, to the foreign policy story. But one of the common denominators is that the president, in this case, Donald Trump, but I'll make a point later that it's really about the presidency, not just Trump, that is, that this one person has become the center of all of these disputes, not just discussing them, but purporting to settle them, purporting to solve them, whether it's foreign policy crises or the taxes imposed on imports or the enforcement and design of immigration policy. Congress in our constitutional system is supposed to be the primary branch. And either because it has formally transferred power in the case of tariffs, or has informally kind of defaulted to the executive branch over multiple administrations, not just Republican administrations. We are where we are now, where everybody's trying to lobby the White House, including members of Congress who, as I understand it, Algenon, have the power to pass bills. So they don't need to lobby the president, they just need to pass bills.
And there's so many, you and I talked about this off air. There's literally so many directions for this conversation to go. And to my audience, we only have 30 minutes, so that means we're going to cover like 2% of the Trump administration today. I mean, we're just going to try to hit on the most important issues. But you're talking about something that I've been watching very closely. And again, I started off the show talking about how much of an insider you are. You talk to a lot of elected officials, not just Republicans, but on both sides of the aisle. I mean, what is Congress doing to itself by not really asserting its authority right now, and not just tariffs, but everything we've seen happen in the past 78 days? I mean, what is Congress really doing to itself? And then as a tag along to that question, considering the fact that Donald Trump really isn't pursuing legislation behind these ideas, and they all seem to be done unilaterally through executive orders, do you think this administration is serious?
Well, I do think it is serious. They are pursuing a couple of big pieces of legislation, the budget and extending the 2017 tax cuts. Some members of Congress, Republicans in particular, would say, look, we have concerns about other things that are happening, but we have to focus on those two big lifts. One of them has a time, actually, both of them have time constraints because you've got to either default on our debts or you have to approve the increase in the debt ceiling in the context of a new budget. And if you don't act before the end of the fiscal year, the tax cuts that were enacted in 2017 will be revoked, will go away, and that will raise taxes on most Americans and have its own economic and political consequences. So they are looking at some legislation. But you're right, much of what the president seems to want to do, he thinks he already has the inherent authority as president, or that he already has the authority granted by Congress in the case of import taxes. I think Congress is emasculating itself. It's got to assert its power here. As I said earlier, it is very easy for supporters or opponents of Donald Trump to make this current set of issues all about him. That's certainly what he likes. But that's not accurate. President Biden, President Obama, President Bush, George W. Bush, all of them to varying degrees used executive orders to accomplish certain policy ends because they became convinced they couldn't get bills passed through Congress. That's not the purpose of executive orders. And in the case of Trump, he's doing something fairly new, which is to reintroduce the concept of impoundment. Basically, Congress has voted to fund a certain thing. The president says, no, I'm not going to fund it. And that is kind of a complex matter. We don't have deep roots to get into here, but there's nothing wrong with the president saying that Congress appropriated $50 million to build this asset. I think I can build it for $40 million, so I'm not obligated to spend the extra $10 million. That's fine. What the president can't say is, I know Congress has appropriated $50 million, but I don't like it, and so I'm just not going to spend it. That's a line item veto. Whether we should have a line item veto, we could have a policy debate about. We do not have a line item veto. The president doesn't get to veto particular items because he doesn't agree with them.
Yeah, I just continued as I watch everything unfold day by day, and it feels like a slow motion train wreck to me.
It feels slow to you because it feels like a pretty fast train wreck to me.
It feels like we've been through the whole 4-year term already, but we still have a long way to go here. I just keep wondering if a Democrat ends up back in the White House and has and attempts to what we see happening with Donald Trump, what will Republicans say when that occurs? Because they really aren't leaving themselves a lot of line out here. I mean, they seem to be going along with this, and I think we're on a slippery slope for many reasons, not just because of Donald Trump, but I agree with you because this is the presidency, and Donald Trump is opening a door for subsequent administrations to come in and attempt to do exactly what he's doing. And I don't think Republicans will have much to stand on when that occurs. Now, the biggest thing that everybody's talking about in the last several days, and this might be the thing that I wonder if this is going to get Donald Trump to blink or not, but it's the tariff situation. Obviously, last week on Wednesday, April 2nd, what President Trump calls a Liberation Day, he imposed a 10% across the board tariff along with additional retaliatory tariffs against 60 of our trading partners all around the world. And the market has been reeling. Every economist that I know of that has any credibility is saying this is going to push us into some kind of a recession. I'm actually beginning to get fearful that this might push us into stagflation, How do you see this sort of reshaping United States trade dynamics and the impact on just everyday Americans?
I think it's a policy disaster on every level, economically, politically, and institutionally. As I said earlier, no one ever intended for the president to be able to have the power to levy taxes. You can't do it. The Congress has the power. The Congress gave the president a limited grant of power on import taxes and for specific emergencies, which does not exist. And so this is an attack on the Constitution, but I will set that aside and talk about the economics of it. Um, the main issues in the election last fall, in order in terms of the exit polls, were prices, consumer prices, inflation, number one, immigration enforcement, number two, and a sort of cultural concern about DEI and policing people's speech, number three. On number two, I think the Trump administration made a few mistakes, but is still more or less in the general direction the public wants to go, which is to enforce immigration law. It doesn't mean they're against immigrants, but it does mean they want to enforce the law. We can talk about number three, but number one is the most important issue: to prices, the economy. And the Trump administration has some good things to do in that area. They're working on energy deregulation, housing deregulation, a variety of other things. There is some value to cutting spending, as we've talked about the past, you and me. But this import tax mess is a disaster economically, as we can see. I mean, it was Liberation Day. For many, many Americans, they were liberated of trillions of dollars of retirement savings that they had. And this is not some short term, well, it's just speculators or something. This is a considered opinion by investors that streams of income are going to be lower, that prices are going to be higher. There's going to be all sorts of pressure that suggests that people ought to retreat to safety. There's a reason why bond yields are going down, and it's not a good reason. It's because people are bailing out of long-term investment and towards short-term cash and short-term instruments and things that are safer. And that augurs very poorly for our long-term economic outlook. In addition to the fact that these tariffs are not reciprocal, they were invented. The formulas were invented by some fifth grader or something, is what it looks like to me. It's like the silliest thing I've ever seen. It would be thrown out of an introductory economics course in college. Very poorly thought out regarding our allies. We're actually tariffing, in some cases, our allies more than our adversaries. And it's just a big mess. I know the president believes in this. But interestingly, if you watch his various advisors explain the policy, they're all over the place. Some people say this will raise lots of money and we can cut income taxes. And other people say it will reshore all this manufacturing, which means we wouldn't raise money from taxing imports because we'd be making our own stuff. Some people say it's just a negotiation tactic. You're just trying to get people to the table and we're going to cut deals and we're going to have even freer trade. And then other members of the administration say, this is not a negotiation. This is a permanent change in policy. The reason why they're all going in different directions is because it is so difficult to justify this policy in any specific way. The trade-offs are obvious, so they're just denying them. They're saying we can have A and we cannot have A, and we can have our cake and we can eat it too. And in fact, we'll get 3 more cakes that people just deliver to our home for nothing. And it's pie in the sky stuff. And as you can see in the markets, as you can see in the politics, as polling on this goes south for the president, it's just not selling very well.
No, it's not as well at all. I had dinner with an investor on Thursday night, and they had lost over $250,000 in the market just that day. And you've seen companies like Apple, which are American-based companies, that lost $350 billion in market valuation literally overnight. And today, actually, as you and I record this conversation, the president's own ally, Elon Musk, is starting to break from the White House on what's happening with this whole global trade realignment. So it does seem like the entire administration is going a lot of different directions. I will tell you, though, something you said I want to go back to. You said Donald Trump really believes this will work. And I'm convinced of that as well, John. And I went back and listened to a lot of things that Trump has said since the 80s. I believe this is just his ideology. I think he firmly believes, I don't think he believes that he's being dishonest or creating uncertainty. If we were able to go inside of his head, he firmly believes this will work. This is a part of his philosophy. Apparently, there's millions and millions of Americans in the world that also believe that this will work. And I've watched your Facebook feed, as I'm sure you've seen my Facebook feed, and I've watched many others try to explain to people how this really works and how this doesn't work. The president came out on Truth Social this morning and said, for quote, "Don't be weak and stupid. Keep buying." That's coming out of the president of the United States. Obviously, you just talked about, and I totally agree with you. I don't see how these tariffs actually lead to more revenue when you're saying that you're implementing the tariffs to basically onshore the jobs, which
Right.
should do away with the tariff revenue.
Yeah,
So
you can't collect tariffs on products that aren't imported. It's by definition a tariff is an import tax. I mean, here's one of the things about this. There's all sorts of issues that you and I could talk about, housing and taxes and education, where we can believe there's a certain policy that will work, and we will admit there'll be some trade-offs, there'll be some costs, but we think the benefits outweigh the costs. That's not really the story here. I mean, if you're trying to reshore American manufacturing and you're convinced that this is the answer, it's a problem when you lose literally the National Association of Manufacturers, NAM, which represents American manufacturers. They're against this tariff stuff. They are screaming bloody murder about how costly it will be for many of these companies because, of course, it is very backward, very elementary to think that there are products made in America and there's other products made in Mexico and there's other products made in Spain, and never the twain shall meet. The reality is that in today's world, if you look at a Ford truck, lots of the Ford truck may be ultimately put together in a domestic plant, but it's using all sorts of materials, not just raw materials like steel and aluminum, but also auto parts that are made in Canada or Mexico, textiles that are made. Remember, cars have all sorts of things in them, not just metal, but lots of petrochemicals and textiles. And so the truth is that someone making a car, making a bus, North Carolina, for example, makes lots of buses and trucks. We don't make cars yet. We have lots of buses and trucks. And that means that we're constantly moving things across the border from Canada to US to Mexico to the US to Mexico to US and back and forth because that's the lowest cost way to deliver a car. Domestic American cars, Fords, Chryslers, these tariffs will raise the price of those cars by thousands of dollars. So when consumers go and buy these cars, they're going to say, wait a minute, I'm buying domestic. Why are the tariffs raising the price? Because, of course, domestic is kind of the final stop in a chain of events that happens all around the world. So this is not good for American manufacturing. This is bad for manufacturing, as is evident by the fact that most manufacturers say so.
Well, not to mention, you also need steel to build manufacturing facilities, to build out manufacturing infrastructure. So we're actually raising the costs of the
Yes.
inputs that we need to be able to create the infrastructure to
There are
own
many more
jobs.
people who work in companies that use steel than there are companies that produce steel. So focusing on, well, maybe if we reshore all the steel making, then that will be great for American industry. Well, there will be some few people who benefit, but lots and lots of products are made in America, or at least finally assembled in America, based on parts and raw materials like steel that come from elsewhere. And it's just extremely costly. Defending this policy, there's a reason why they're having trouble doing it, because it is so challenging to make
But
all the math add up.
I guess where my question is going is there's a real divide that there was already a divide amongst the American electorate. Now the divide is even greater. You know, you've got some supporters, and I get into these Facebook skirmishes as well. Some supporters argue tariffs will protect American industries. Obviously, you and I are on the same page that we think that these policies will raise prices. It's becoming more and more evident to me the average voter does not understand how globalization and international trade works. When all of this comes out in the wash, what does this mean for the MAGA base? What does it mean for Republicans? Because I think they're all going to wake up at least at some point here soon to a rude awakening.
I believe that's correct. I mean, there are some true believers in restrictionist trade policies. I mean, there were people supporting Ross Perot back when I was first starting out in political journalism, who was making some similar arguments. There's nothing new about that constituency. It's not very big, but there is a true believer constituency that America was better off when we had high tariffs and that sort of thing. Most people don't follow these issues closely. These Republican-leaning voters, they trust Donald Trump right now. If Trump says this will work, they tend to think it will. I don't think it will. So at some point, I think he will either blink and think, okay, well, maybe I got to do this slower, or there will be a backlash and it will hurt him politically. But I just want to point out that the politics of this has already gone south. I mean, just in the last several weeks, the constituency for trade restrictions and tariffs and all that has gone way down as people start to see the effects of this. And so I think that the consequences will be, the political consequences will be severe if they stick to it. But here's the other thing I want to briefly mention. I'm a conservative. I'm an American conservative, so I want to preserve the Constitution and our free enterprise system and all that. This is extremely dangerous because people might very well conclude, like they did after the Smoot-Hawley tariff of 1930, we have a depression or serious recession. It's because of capitalism. It's because of all those companies, and government needs to tell them what to do. This is the opposite of that. If that happens, if there is an economic downturn or stagflation, as you say, it will not be because of capitalism. It will be because of government intervention, government regulation, and taxation of private industry. Unfortunately, the political consequences may be bad for those who believe in freedom and may be good for those who want to regulate business more.
Springtime brings so many special occasions, so why not spring into Dewey's for all your celebration needs? From custom, unique cakes to balloons and party tableware to the perfect gift, Dewey's is your one-stop shop in the Triad. Even if you don't have a big event on the horizon, it's always a great day to stop by your local Dewey's Bakery, especially on Mondays for a free Cake Square Day. No purchase necessary and available all year round at any of their Triad area locations in Winston-Salem at Thruway Shopping Center and Renolda Manor, and in Greensboro at the Friendly Shopping Center. Need to place that order now? Visit local.deweys.com, and as a listener of the Triad Podcast Network, you'll receive 25% off by using the code PODCAST. Our friends at Dewey's are always finding great ways to give back to our local community, providing millions of dollars to nonprofits. Your organization can also partner with Dewey's to raise money. Just email cake@deweys.com to learn more. Don't miss the chance to make your event even more special with an order at local.deweys.com. Use the promo code PODCAST for 25% off. Dewey's. Celebrate every day.
It's time to get serious about your financial future. It's never too early, but it could be too late to get started. And that's oftentimes the hardest part, getting started. How much do I save? Where do I invest? Do I save for college or retirement? How much for each? And who do I talk to about it all? Okay, we'll keep things simple for now and help you answer the last one. We recommend you begin with a local financial advisor. And that's Jennifer Johnson of Three Magnolias Financial Advisors. She'll sit down with you for a complimentary introductory consultation and go over all of your questions. Get started on the path to achieving your financial goals. Visit threemagnoliasfinancialadvisors.com or call 336-701-1600. Get comfortable with your financial future. Three Magnolias Financial Advisors. Retirement, financial planning, and investments.
Securities offered through Private Client Services. Member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Three Magnolias Financial Advisors. Three Magnolias Financial Advisors and Private Client Services are not affiliated. Private Client Services is under separate ownership from any other named entity.
Well, I tell you, this is probably one of the greatest self-inflicted economic wounds ever in this country. Now, it's one thing if we were just going through this because the markets dictated it, or the economy is cyclical, so we just happen to be in a bad cycle. But this seems to be induced, and I just can't find another moment in history where we just had a self-inflicted wound along these lines.
Well, there's a quick point to make, which is that some people defend this by saying, aren't you concerned about China? Should we be dependent upon China? Notice that China does not come up very much now regarding the tariff debate. They were affected, they've retaliated, but there's an argument for restricting our trade in strategic materials and high technology with a potential military adversary of China. That has absolutely nothing to do with this trade policy, which is being applied to Vietnam, it's being applied to Germany, it's being applied to Mexico, it's being applied all around the world. This is not about containing China. In fact, this is empowering China.
Well, at the end of last week, China did announce a 34% retaliatory tariff. And then for my audience, President Trump has come out today, this morning, and has already announced a 50% additional tariff on China if the 34% tariff goes into effect. So this whole trade war is definitely starting to ratchet up. John Hood, I'm gonna have to take issue with something. You said that you were a conservative. There's a lot of people around North Carolina that says you're not a conservative any longer. So I've been told that I'm no longer a conservative. I've been told that the Carolina Journal is no longer conservative. I've been told that you're no longer conservative. So the definition of conservatism is definitely moving around in this new administration. You brought up some of our international partners in the European Union and others. And obviously, I think not only what's happening with tariffs, but even before the tariff policy got implemented, we were already on shaky ground with some of our foreign partners. Trump has had a very critical tone toward NATO, and that's alarmed a lot of our allies. What do you think is what is Trump's long-term foreign policy strategy? Because I noticed that Russia is missing from the whole tariff war right now.
Well, that's because we don't actually have normal trade relations with Russia. So that's a technical reason why it's not on the list. But I think there's an obvious other reason. Look, you're right. Before the tariff conflict, there was already disputes that were affecting America's standing in the world. Now, one can have a good faith disagreement, as I have with some friends of mine about Ukraine. I happen to be a big supporter of American involvement in Ukraine. I think that's to our interest, the interest of our allies. It will save us money and lives in the long run. Russia to be defeated and have to accept something like a stalemate or whatever. That's a good idea. But you could have a disagreement with me about that, and you'll still be my friend, and we'll be allies on other matters. That's not the problem, really. It's not the only problem. When you say we want Greenland and we're not ruling out force, when you say, Canada's not a real country, it should just be part of America. Okay, that is at worst actual military threats of our allies will destroy our relationships. At best, it's the kind of trolling that maybe your 20-year-old son does online, and you say, kid, but don't stop doing that. But it is not something that the president of the United States or anybody associated with the White House should be doing. History will look very poorly on that part of this early Trump 2 administration, because it makes the administration look unserious, like it is a bunch of kids playing on the internet instead of a real. I mean, look at it this way. Nobody voted for Donald Trump on the grounds that finally we will acquire Canada. Okay, no one did that. I'm fairly certain most of the people voted for Trump don't want Canada for obvious reasons, political reasons. So it just this is not just a distraction. I wish it was just a distraction or something silly. This is a dangerous direction that this administration has pursued. Most of the people carrying out Trump's wishes probably don't agree with them, but they feel like they have to do it. And if the tariff thing had happened without that, it would have still been a problem. But because it has happened after several months of trolling our allies, it has further alienated them in ways that I'm not sure can be repaired in the near future.
I totally agree. And even some of these countries have actually come out and said, like, stop kidding around here. Like, stop right. Stop the jokes here. And right. I think we're reaching a point where they don't believe this is joking any longer. I don't even know if it's joking. I don't know if they're real
sure
or not.
The Danes and the Greenlanders, they no longer think that this is a joke. Now, the Canadians are annoyed and angry. I don't think they actually believe that, a failed invasion during the Revolutionary War and a failed invasion, actually 6 failed invasions during the War of 1812, all failed, but finally America will invade Canada. They don't believe that's going to happen. They're just put out with their neighbor. But the Danes are genuinely alarmed that the Americans may claim, sovereignty over something that they have no right to do. So I think this is a dangerous thing, particularly, the Danes and the Canadians. They fought shoulder to shoulder with America. Not just in the past, but in the recent past. They fought in Afghanistan, shoulder to shoulder with us. They took casualties, even though they were not directly impacted during 9/11. They fought with their friend, with their longtime ally, and we have turned around and insulted them. I just think it is dishonorable, and dishonor is never going to be a way to build long-term relationships in free societies.
What's your reaction to Vice President Vance visiting Greenland? Secretary of State Marco Rubio seems to be going along with all these. I mean, these were prior to this administration. I considered these folks to be serious Republicans, but they're not standing up to Donald Trump while he's wrecking these relationships.
I would distinguish between the two. It is obvious to me that Vance has at least convinced himself that these are wise policies and he's trying to sell. I think you could tell in Rubio's face and body language that he is not convinced that these are good ideas, but is going along anyway. I'm no big Rubio fan anymore, but I do think he has better sense. I can't say that about Vance. I think that he is a malign actor at this point. And in fact, in some ways, Vance is actually tugging Trump away from his more sensible, realist foreign policy advisors and towards this cranky sort of position that Vance has gotten himself into. And I think Rubio's on the other side of that tug.
Are we opening some kind of a door for China to come in and start strengthening their international relations? I got to imagine that they're standing back and looking at this and saying, okay, America is now the disturbing factor in the world, and we want to come in and be the calming factor. Europe, if they tell you if America won't protect you, we'll protect you, is what I can imagine the Chinese are saying right now.
I think that's correct. It is evident, it is transparent that the Trump administration believes it can put a spike in between Russia and China, split that alliance, split the CRINC alliance, China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. I don't think that can happen, certainly not the strategy they're pursuing, because they are strengthening China's hand. And in the short run, at least, they're strengthening Russia's hand. In the long run, we'll have to see if Russia can really survive as a state, honestly. But China is not in that scenario. China is by far the senior partner in the CRINC alliance. Everything we've done, including just putting tariffs on Southeast Asian countries that are our friends, putting tariffs on India, which should be our primary new ally against China. India has a kind of a non-interventionist sense, but they're very worried about the rise of China. And to attack them this way, rhetorically and economically, it strengthens China's hand. Now, I don't think Donald Trump is this Russiagate stuff and this is an asset of a foreign power. Someone as shameless as Donald Trump can't really be blackmailed. Okay, so that's not it. But I do think that he is at least unwittingly weakening America and strengthening the hand of Russia and China. And that is just not the right policy mix for the president of the United States to pursue.
John, I want to work in two last questions. I could do this all afternoon. I tell you, just listening to you and being able to ask you some good pointed questions. Doge has really taken center stage. And now you and we're on the same page. I think that the government runs very inefficient. There is a lot of waste. There is a lot of fraud. There is a lot of abuse. There is a lot of overspending. And we do need to come in and curtail and create some kind of a fiscal austerity program that places the government back on the right track. I'm just not convinced that the way Doge has went about doing their job, the method by which they went about doing their job, is the most effective way to get there. And to have this sort of end around Congress where Congress isn't even involved in the conversation tells me that anything that's being done is not going to be done on a sustainable basis. Elon Musk has taken a lot of heat. I'm shocked that someone who's a billionaire and has multiple companies to run would even want to come and get in the middle of all this, but he certainly volunteered as tribute to do so. What has been your reaction to the whole Doge cuts and even the involvement of a billionaire like Elon Musk?
Well, I don't think his involvement will last a whole lot longer. There are some of the cuts that I agree with. There's some of them that I strongly disagree with. But the main thing is they are mostly a distraction. You're right that they are working in areas that Congress, you don't need a congressional act, like reducing workforce. Federal payroll is about 4% of the federal budget. If we eliminated everybody that works for the federal government, we will only modestly reduce the gigantic deficits, which are almost 30% of the budget is borrowed. Okay, so this is just basic math. This is not where the money is. In fact, the federal workforce is not much larger than it was in the 1980s.
Yep.
Well,
Around 2
that's
million
not
people.
it.
Yep.
We're mostly paying contractors, paying medical providers, and paying benefits to individuals. That's mostly what the federal government does. And we're going to have to do less of all of those things to balance our budget. So I like the impulse, but everything you need to know about how this was poorly conceived is revealed by that story several weeks ago where Musk got it in his head, and even Trump repeated it. We had all these folks who were claiming to be 130 years old and getting Social Security benefits. If you know anything about government systems and Social Security and pay pension, you already know what that story is. That story was explained decades ago. They're just some people, they didn't have records on what their birthday was. So it defaulted to the beginning of the 20th century or something. It doesn't mean it. No one is claimed. Most of those people aren't even alive. And they're not getting benefits. That is not where Social Security benefits are going. They're not being stolen by fraudsters claiming to be 130 years old. And yet the president of the United States and his top advisor of this Doge project, they actually said that. And that tells me they just haven't, it's like they showed up to class, they're about to take my test in my class, and they haven't done the readings.
That's exactly what it feels like. Here's my last question. It looks like obviously there was a rebuke of the Republican Party in this Wisconsin state election. I'm absolutely convinced that it's because of Elon Musk. If he would have avoided the limelight, you just wouldn't have seen the turnout that you saw on the Democratic side. I watched the special elections in Florida. Of course, Republicans won both races. But when you look at margins, those margins were cut in half from when Trump won those districts just a few months ago. We've got a gubernatorial election in Virginia this year. 144,000 of the electorate in Virginia work for the federal government. And then, as we all know, the midterm election season kicks up probably around August or September of this year. Will we start to see less of Elon Musk as we get more into these political cycles?
I think we'll see less of him this spring. I just think he'll be bored. Trump's probably tired of him getting too much attention. I think that romance is cooling. But yes, American politics has a thermostatic feel to it. You got Republicans do well in the presidential cycle, Democrats do better in the midterms, or vice versa. That is fairly normal. It doesn't always happen, but it usually happens. It's the size of the effect that the president or either his policies or lack of policies will induce. We saw after Obama's election in 2008, people thought the Democrats were a majority party forever, and 2 years later they got shellacked. Same thing happened to Bush's party in 2006. It could very well happen in 2026. The Republicans could limit the damage, but that means changing course and actually pursuing a more conservative course. Instead of telling me that I'm not a conservative, I would point out that almost everything I'm saying, I know you didn't say this, but almost everything that I said is I'm saying the Trump administration is to my left on economics, on the Constitution, on foreign policy. If they would move back to my position, the conservative position, they would be better off.
I saw this morning our good friend Dan Gurley was saying that even President Reagan wouldn't win the Republican nomination in today's climate with some of the rhetoric. But John, as I get ready to depart from you, I love your intelligence and awareness and just how much you keep up with these issues. I'm having to tell myself to unplug a little bit from the news because I'm consuming 9 or 10 hours of news every day because there's so much going on. So I'm having to pull back. What's one thing, if you could tell my audience just one thing that they could watch for 2025, what's that one thing they need to keep their eyes on?
Supreme Court cases. A lot of these issues are going to be tested in the courts. I think in many cases, the Trump administration will lose some of their claims at the Supreme Court level. There'll be a lot of screaming and hollering about it, but it will reassert some constraints on executive power and on administrative agency power, which sometimes comes at the expense of the president. And I think those will actually be good precedents for the future.
To my audience, you heard it here first. Make sure you keep an eye on the Supreme Court because that's where a lot of these issues will most likely get resolved. As always, John, I appreciate you locking in with me. I'm sure we'll wait about another 90 days and get you back in here again and see what's going on over the summer. And to my audience, as always, I appreciate you locking in. Make sure you stay tuned to WTOB because that's where you can lock in every Sunday morning. But if you happen to miss me there, hopefully you are subscribed to the podcast. You can get that on Pandora, Spotify, Apple, wherever you like to download your favorite podcast, you can lock in there. As always, until next time,
Hey, thanks for listening to this episode on the Triad Podcast Network. Our mission is simple: provide information, advice, and stories about the people and places that make the North Carolina Triad such a great place to be. You can find us by searching Triad Podcast Network on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, pretty much wherever you like to listen. If you like what you heard and want to support the show and those that contribute, we would truly appreciate a rating and review on your favorite podcast app. It helps spread the word along, as do your shares on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram at Triad Podcast. To get in touch with us, simply email info@triadpodcast.com. Thanks for listening.
This is the Triad Podcast Network.